Now that the entire football world has had the pleasure of witnessing the absolute freak show of athleticism put on display this past weekend at the NFL Combine by prospect Anthony Richardson, he has received player comps to one player in particular 10 times more than any other player. That player being Cam Newton, with many people, including former Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Robert Griffin III, going as far as to say that Anthony Richardson is superior to Cam Newton physically and could potentially be a better prospect than Ace Boogie. And I have some thoughts on that. And we're going to get into that right after this.
From the foe, you dig?
Welcome to The Way I See It with Jamario Rashad. This is a Carolina Panthers fan channel. Please do me a favor by hitting the like button and please make sure you subscribe. I am on my road to getting this channel to 2K. And now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get to this nonsense. Now, for starters, I want to point out that these two guys both had similar journeys, ultimately ending up with them both being at the University of Florida as their destination coming out of high school. Now, in terms of how sought after they were as high school prospects, Anthony Richardson, according to 247 Sports Composite, was a four-star prospect with 17 offers coming out of high school, most notably having offers from Georgia, Michigan, Louisville, Penn State, and of course where he ended up at being Florida. Now, Cam Newton, according to the same website, was a composite consensus five-star prospect, and at the time he received 7 big-time offers, most notably being from Georgia, Mississippi State, Oklahoma, and of course Florida, where he would ultimately end up. Now, you all know that Cam Newton actually ran into a couple of issues during his time at Florida and was actually relegated down to JUCO for a level, so he was actually recruited for a second time. So coming out of JUCO after winning the JUCO Player of the Year, MVP, whatever it is, national championship, all the awards he could have gotten at that level, he was then offered 5 more scholarships, most notably being from Arizona again, as well as Mississippi State, Oklahoma, and where he would eventually end up and create one of the greatest, if not, in my opinion, the greatest college football legacies of all time during his 1 year at Auburn. Now, to move forward to just talk about how did these two guys perform statistically during their time in college. Now, they were both only full-time starters for 1 year. Now, Anthony Richardson, in his 1 year of starting, he only played in 12 games, but in those 12 games, he had 2,549 passing yards, 17 passing TDs, as well as 9 interceptions. He also got out there as he was a dual threat and used his legs to gain 654 yards and 9 touchdowns. That is a total of 26 touchdowns, and he had a record of 6-6 as he did not play in the bowl game that his team was eligible for that year. Now, let's move over to Cam Newton. Now, in Cam Newton's 1 full year of starting at Auburn, he played 12 games, ultimately culminating in a national championship appearance as well as a win, and he passed for 2,854 yards. He had 30 passing touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. He used his leg and was the ultimate dual threat that college football has ever seen, rushing for 1,473 yards and an additional 20 touchdowns, totaling 51 total touchdowns. He had 1 receiving touchdown, which is just outrageous, but Cam Newton is so gifted athletically that, of course, they just found a way to get him the ball in any way, shape, or form they could. So in that year, he had 51 total touchdowns and a record of 14-0 and being the best college player in the entire country that year. So in their 1 year, stacked up against the field, the entirety of the country, Cam Newton was just easily the better quarterback, performed better, had better stats, had better accomplishments, and he was just overall better in their comparatively so in their 1 years. But now let's whittle this down to how they performed in what many had considered at the time and in the past to be the super conference within the college football ranks, being the SEC. Statistically, how did each guy rank in terms of how they faced against the other athletes within the SEC? Now, in terms of top 10 rankings, Anthony Richardson had three notable top 10 stats. Those being he was 10th in passing yards, ninth in passing TDs, and ninth in total yards. Now, to give you all a little more context on that, within the SEC, Anthony Richardson was top 10 in 11 different statistical categories, but he was number one for none of them. Now let's go ahead and compare that to what Cam Newton was able to do in his year at Auburn. And most notably, what he was top 10 for in terms of offensive statistics. He was first in passer efficiency rating, sixth in passing yards, second in passing TDs, first in rushing yards, of course, first in rushing TDs, first in yards, first in points, first in just, like, he was just dominant in every facet of the word. Now, to give you a little more context on Cam Newton was top 10 for 22 separate statistical offensive categories within the SEC, and he was number one for 12 of those categories and number two for 4 or 5 additional more. So he was just absolutely the greatest offensive weapon college football had ever seen, and he showed out this year more than Anthony Richardson could have dreamed of. Now let's take this comparison a little further. How were these guys compensated in terms of award recognition and honors? Now, Anthony Richardson, the only award that he earned during his tenure at Florida was the All SEC Freshman Team, which was over a year ago and had nothing to do with the full year of him starting. Now, Cam Newton, comparatively so, as you see on the graphic, in his 1 year at Auburn, he won all the awards. Absolutely all of the awards. AP Player of the Year, Consensus All-American, Davey O'Brien Award, Heisman Award winner, Manning Award, Maxwell Award, SEC Player of the Year, Walter Camp Player of the Year, and anything you wanted to name, Cam Newton was that. Cam Newton was the best player that year and is the greatest college football player of all time. So when you look at how their college careers stacked up against one another in terms of what should be expected of them as prospects, if we are looking at this through the lens of production, Anthony Richardson is not in the same field, is not anywhere near the level of Cam Newton in terms of productivity coming out of college. So Cam Newton undoubtedly was a better prospect in this facet of the game. Now let's go ahead and move on to the tangibles. How did these guys measure? What was their size? How did they do at the combine? Now, Anthony Richardson, as I mentioned in the intro, was an absolute marvel to witness over the weekend, as he was one of the most, if not the most exciting player to actually display his talents at the NFL Combine, having a blazing 4.40, which I believe which was later, after this graphic was actually created, later on officially marked down to a maybe a 4.38 or somewhere in there, but officially what I saw on my TV was a 4.4, which for a guy that is 6'4" and 1/4, 244 pounds, is just athletically gifted from the gods. That type of burst, that type of speed is just uncommon. You do not get that in a man of that size. And yes, that is something to give him that he should be patted on the back for, because it was a athleticism display. That is what the combine is, and he put on a show for us, man. So he had the 10'9" broad jump, as well as a 40.5-inch vertical. Now, in terms of all of the outputs, all of the testable measures, he did slightly edge out Cam Newton in each one of those, as Cam Newton only ran a 4.6 in the 40, had a 10.6 broad jump, and a 35-inch vertical. Anthony Richardson was able to jump a lot higher than Cam Newton, for whatever that is worth. But in terms of what we found out here and what we can look at it here, although Anthony Richardson is compared to Cam mostly through the lens of play style as well as physical build, Cam Newton still is the larger athlete and still was doing the same type of things that Anthony Richardson was, to a higher level, on a higher level of consistency, and he was able to do that in a bigger body. So although Anthony Richardson may be more explosive, Cam Newton still wins when we look at the comparison in terms of size. So now, when it comes down to my conclusion, man, do I believe that Anthony Richardson is as good of a prospect or potentially better than Cam Newton? The answer to that is unequivocally and absolutely not. I believe that this is lazy analysis. And personally, as a Carolina Panthers fan, I will admittedly say that emotionally looking at Anthony Richardson and the nostalgia that I feel seeing a player of that build with those traits, looking at his highlights, looking at that play style, it just gives me the nostalgic feeling of what we got for that decade with Cam Newton. But I believe comparing him to Cam Newton, who I said before is the greatest college football player of all time, is unfair to Anthony Richardson. These two guys may be of similar build, but they so you can look at it and say they are the same animal, but Cam Newton is a completely different beast. He wins out in terms of college accomplishments, college statistics. He wins in terms of measurable size, and Anthony Richardson did not just blow all of his combine measurables out of the waters for me to say that he is a more athletic marvel than we have in Cam Newton. He is just similar, but he has not been able to put the pieces together, similar to how we've saw Cam Newton do on two separate levels of college football in consecutive years, winning national championships on the lower level JUCO and then going up to the next level and winning the actual natty at Auburn. We can't give Anthony Richardson the grace of just expecting him to do something like that when Cam Newton was a older prospect. Don't let anybody lie to you and say that he did not have a better arm. He was not a more sound passer coming into the league at this time. The one thing that Anthony Richardson would have on his side if he was drafted to my Carolina Panthers would be the advantage of the coaching staff, but that is a projection moving forward. And with the information that we've been presented so far in terms of college stats, combine measurables, tape, whatever you want to say it, unequivocally, no, Anthony Richardson is not as good of a prospect as Cam Newton, man. So with that being said, man, that is the end of the video. I just wanted to bring this little silly comparison I just wanted to put it to bed. Anthony Richardson is a great prospect. I would love to see him in a Carolina Panthers uniform, either him or Stroud. But the comparison to him as a prospect to Cam Newton is unfair, and it is placing very, very high and unfair expectations on a young man that he does not deserve. But with that being said, what do you all think about this video and about this topic? Do you think Anthony Richardson is as good of a prospect or anywhere in the ballpark of as being as good of a prospect as Cam Newton. Whatever you all think, leave your comments down below. And with that being said, I'm Jamario Rashad. This is the way I see it, and I'm out. Peace.